All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Ben Howe. It's July 6, 2022, and we're at Stoller. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get you started is why wine?
Why wine, I guess. So I kind of took an interesting path to the industry, I guess. I just moved out to Oregon just with a buddy of mine, and we were just kind of looking for a new start or a new place to be. You know, I grew up in the Midwest, and and coming out here, you know, there's wine country, you know, and that's not something we had when I was growing up or where I grew up. So you a little bit of exposure there, but at the time I worked in technology and basically in tech, and had known my whole. Knew after a couple of years of working that I got a 2-year tech degree, and it was just kind of just having a job basically, and knew that, you know, this really isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. I can do something more interesting. Knew that I also wanted to go back to school. So it took a few years of being in Oregon, and then a friend of mine that I worked with at Hewlett-Packard had introduced me to the Fermentation Science program. So I looked at that. I said, "Oh, this is a really interesting." Excuse me. This is a really interesting field. Basically, it's not any one particular solid discipline of science. I've always kind of been a scientist, but you know, so I wasn't going to learn chemistry, you know, and just like every form of it, you know. So it's like just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Said, hey, that's a pretty cool program. So joined the program kind of with the thought that I would go into the brewing industry maybe at the time, but kept an open mind about, you know, hey, I don't know everything about the wine side either, because those are the two focuses at the time for Oregon State. Now they've since kind of divided into more discrete programs, but at the time it was broader. So just over the course of the educational period, got introduced to good wines, actually. And, you know, I remember the first time I tasted some really nice Pinot, I was like, wow, this is actually pretty amazing stuff. I think it was Ken Wright. At the time, we had a series of courses where winemakers would come in from the industry and, you know, come to the class. It was like an hour-long thing. So every week we get a new winemaker that would come in and talk about their history, you know, how they got into the business, and, you know, give pointers and advice. It was a really neat course, and we'd always meet at a bottle shop after the class and taste wines, get to talk to them and stuff. So just got a lot of exposure that way. Simultaneously, I took an internship with a Sizable Brewery back in Kansas City, and, you know, I did that for the summer. It was a lot of fun. Cool industry as well, but I could see, you know, every day was kind of the same thing. You know, it's like, okay, you're here, it's 9:05, time to go do this, you know, test that. I was working in a lab at the time, but it just didn't seem as dynamic as what I think wine would be. And I could see that, you know, the wine cycle is, you know, 12 months, and so you're kind of doing, you know, something for 1 month and just switching from task to task, and it just never gets stale in that way. So I kind of need to be stimulated with more and new and different. So otherwise the job just gets too boring for me. So that's kind of how I chose wine. I guess I should say I did an internship with the Gallo family down in California, and that was my first kind of foray into the industry. Again, not fully set at that point in time, but I had a pretty good idea I would go into wine, and then that kind of fell into the next thing and the next thing, and then it was just for me at that point in time.
So you mentioned kind of the dynamicness or dynamic of wine. At what point did you mentioned kind of going to Gallo? So tell me about what prompted that internship and what came out of that for you.
Yeah, they came to the campus, you know, and it was for me it was, you know, a way to maybe get out of Oregon for a little bit. What I wanted to see working for them was, what the magnitude of the industry is. Of course, they're one of the biggest wine companies in the world. And that was kind of always the thought of was, start big and then maybe step down in size to, obviously get into something more personal, I guess, if you will, where you're actually working with like a single vineyard. When you're working for them, it's far from that, but there's things that you can draw from that will help your career later on. Took that. I just interviewed for the job. I think they came to campus. I interviewed with them. It was for a research winemaking position, so it was a little bit different than what you would think of as Gallo. So we were in this big, I guess it was like kind of a tank farm where there's hundreds of tanks that were hundreds of thousands of gallons. It was primarily their packaging facility, and they would make wine elsewhere, truck it, and bring it in for final packaging in Modesto. But here we are in this huge plant, and we're making wine in basically trash can sized vessels. So it was a juxtaposition, to say the least, but it was really interesting work because we were researching kind of on the cutting edge of viticulture and winemaking as well, looking at new varietals. They're a big research-based company. They have, I think, more funding for research than the California university system, is what I've been told by them anyway. But so they put a lot of money and time into it, and some of the stuff they're researching is very interesting. But simple things is like they had one called an emerging varietals program where they're, hey, what else is grown in other parts of the world that we could also grow and make interesting. So we we were making wine from these small experimental types of grapes that nobody's ever heard of, or they're rare. So doing that kind of stuff. We were doing projects for the viticulture research, so we would make the wines for like a vineyard experiment and stuff like that. So it really just a lot of insight into I guess the current trends that they're looking at and what is important to them, being their company anyway. So yeah, it was well worth the time, but time to move on when it was done too. So they tried to get me to stay in Modesto, and I was like, no, Modesto's not for me. You guys aren't so bad, but anyway, it's not my town anyway.
So coming out of that, you were still intrigued by wine, and you were thinking back to Oregon.
Yeah.
What were you kind of thinking as a goal at that point, or as a path?
I mean, you just kind of work through it. Of course, I think the ultimate goal is at that stage in your career, I believe, is to become a winemaker. We have a lot of interns that are there. When they come, I want to be the next winemaker, and everybody kind of has maybe a different vision about how long that's going to take. So it does take time, and I think over that course of time, you do learn, and your view of the industry changes, and you might have, maybe I want to do this or that, and you see that a lot with young people in the industry as well. Maybe not even realizing that winemaking is a lot more difficult than what it is, or it takes a lot more physical labor. It can be exhausting in many ways, and so at that time, coming out of the internship there was the end of 2006. I had made a connection with them. They had one of the brands that they owned was in New Zealand, so I actually made contact with them, and I said, hey, you guys be looking at, you kind of do this when you're young too. You take the opportunity to travel and find new places, new things. I'm sure many people have told you the same thing. So I was like, hey, it's a chance to go to New Zealand and check that out and work, get paid. It's kind of a break-even proposition at the end of the day, but it's still a good way to go see different parts of the world and of course different types of winemaking. So connected with them. They had another brand called Whitehaven, and that was much more like I guess it's, research winery and then going to a fairly large scale production. I would assume, I didn't really know the numbers. You're just kind of an ant, or, you're working just for them and just carrying out tasks, so you don't really have a good high level view, but they probably, I would guess, a couple 100,000 cases, something like that. Mostly Sauvignon Blanc, but just making Pinot Noir was kind of what I told them that I really wanted to kind of focus on there. So I worked in the red side of the cellars, which was a very small part of their overall program. So,
what was the experience like?
That was interesting. I was, if somebody said to me, like, being in New Zealand's like, being in the U.S., but 25 years ago, so it's just, it's strange in a lot of ways, it was like, that's a pretty good description, of course, if you go to the cities, things are more modern and new, but, we were in a more rural region, and it felt that way in a lot of ways. So the cultural experience was pretty great. There is more, I guess, and you get some of that in Oregon now, but there's really there's a lot of internationals there because they don't have the same amount of labor that we do. They don't have labor that they can pull from migrants, basically, and so you have international people there to pick grapes. You kind of have there to make the wines. That's what they rely on for their industry. So it's just a lot of energy of young people there from all over the world. So that was a really fun part of the experience as well. Good opportunity to meet a lot of different cultures. I mean, that was probably one of the highlights you look at the end of the day, is you got to meet people from all over the world in different places and get exposed to their lives and their lifestyle, as much as learning about the wines and winemaking. A lot of it's just about life too. So,
What came next?
Following that, I remember reaching out to. When I first moved to Oregon, I moved to Eugene. There's a winery there called King Estate Winery, and I think I reached out to them for an internship position. Actually, now that I think about it, I go back in 2006, I had an interview with them and with the Gallo at the same time, and I had to choose it, and I chose them. So then I reached back out to them and I said, "Hey, I can be back on the scene in 2007 if you guys want somebody," and they accepted. And so that was just an internship at that point in time too, with not really a long-term aspiration. I think maybe at that time I said, okay, I could take a job here. It might be interesting. Came back to King Estate in 2007, started working for them. So I worked for them for a little while, and I had a connection with a friend at Gallo, and he was from France. And so his story's kind of funny, because when we worked together in 2006, he had left his girlfriend back in France, and they broke up, and she was from India. And so they really missed each other, all that stuff, and they decided they want to get married or whatever. And so that happened. When I came back to King Estates, they were contacting me. He reached out and he said, "Hey, I really need some help here, with my project." Oh, sorry, I got to go back. He eventually married her and took a job at a winery in India, and so when I got back to King Estate, he called me, and so that kind of came up. So this was kind of an option in the air, when I took the job. And so he actually said, "Well, come fly you and come check the place out." And so kind of at the beginning stages of my 2007 harvest at King Estate, they flew me over to India, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out, I'll take a free plane ride and go see what's up. I really wasn't positive that I would take that opportunity, and so I went, and that was a pretty wild experience. Came back, kind of used that time over harvest to give consideration to that job. But that was in 2007, that was my first Oregon harvest. So again, that one was for a mid-sized winery. I think we were a pretty good sized facility at that time in Oregon. Not a lot of the brands have grown to where they are now. primarily Pinot Gris was their main thing. Did a fair amount of Pinot Noir. The '07 vintage was a cold one. I definitely remember that, where, the winemaker boss at the time was just, things were cooling down, nights were getting shorter, and we're just like, we hadn't picked grapes, and so we're thinking, I remember him commenting, it's like, we're losing sunlight, it's just, are we gonna pull it off this year, so cool vintage. First experience to Oregon wines and Oregon winemaking. Similar, I guess, what I obtained from the winemaking experience there was probably pretty similar to everywhere else. At a certain point, it's a process, and everybody does the process a little bit different. So, yeah. At some point, they offered me some work at King Estate, but I decided to, take the opportunity to go on the other side of the planet and just give that a try. I've said, this isn't going to happen very often in anybody's life, that they're given that kind of a chance to. It was just an experience I couldn't pass up. I was like, well, I don't really have a lot of attachments. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. It was like, why not? And so I did go over there after the 2007 vintage. I kind of took a little bit of time off, and I think right after the new year, I joined that team over there, and it was in Bangalore, India. So it's kind of in the south part of the country there. A pretty legit wine project, I think. A lot of people, you would think, what is this? It's I think they were owned at the time by LVMH, which is Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, and so it was a big brand that had gone in there, and the whole concept there in India was that it was this emerging market. You have this middle class that's gaining wealth, so there was a potential for a big industry, and the owners of the winery that I worked for were they had done business in France in like the 60s and 70s. I don't really know the full history of there. I was told that it was some kind of military stuff, maybe. I don't know what it was. But so they had spent a lot of time traveling back and forth from France, the Indian family. And I think at one point in time, at least the story as told to me, was like in the 80s, they were like, well, why can't we just grow our own grapes and make our own wine instead of, because, taxes and tariffs and stuff and on products coming into India at the time, I imagine it was very expensive, so they kind of saw the opportunity to grow a little bit of their own grapes. So they had started that winery, I believe, in the mid 80s probably, so they'd been in the business for a while. And then, the economic situation in India had happened and developed, and, in 2008 I was there, and at some point in time they had realized the full potential of the business, and that's when they, I assume, got investors and all that stuff, so really trying to scale that. So we were working in a very old winery by Indian standards, one of the earlier brands, trying to scale that program up to where, because there was basically unlimited potential for sales. I think a lot of the product they were actually selling at that point in time went to, that I was told, went to Indian wineries or Indian restaurants all over the world, So it's kind of funny because I've seen the same wines in the United States, I went to Paris, and a friend of mine, we walked to the Indian district, and there's the wine that we were producing in India, It's just the irony of that. I don't think I've made a wine here in the U.S. that's made it to Paris, but the one I made in India was there, so that was kind of a funny story, but so that was a pretty wild experience, if you can imagine the infrastructure in an old winery like that, and it was Bangalore, it was a very rural part outside of there, and so you're just kind of dealing with the same craziness that, power outages, labor strikes, they had a small union in the company. I mean, there was just unimaginable to me at the time obstacles into making a quality wine. I kind of came into the into the job with, and of course, think about it. So I was intern. And here was this, and I think my official title was enologue there. It's kind of the French version of a winemaker. And my friend was he was more of a viticulturist and kind of on the engineering side of things. So he was maybe more akin to like a general manager or an operations person. And he's like, I don't really know winemaking, so you can do this part, and come in there with high aspirations to make quality wine. And it didn't take me very long to learn that I just wanted to make dry wine, just like get the fermentation complete and maintain the quality of the wine as best as possible, So those were the challenges, when you have so many things happening with power outages, and it's like you're just faced with the tools that you need to finish the wines properly were lacking, and so I could go into a million stories about all that, but so I quickly learned that just finish the wines and try to maintain their integrity was the main goal. And it was interesting because my friend told me from his perspective, he's like, hey, don't come in just trying to change everything, it's like figure out the way that they do the work, and that would be just kind of the average Indian worker there. And there was a kind of a mid-management team there as well, and so it was just just kind of observe their work and modify it, slowly. So it was kind of a bit of an intro to management as well, So, but there was just so many crazy things that I tried. I just couldn't believe some of the things, I mean, an example I would say is in the bottling line. We had our own bottling facility there. Well, okay, so I show up to the place and they're like, harvest is like a month away, that's when we start, and all the tanks are full and we have to bottle, so we have to empty the tanks by bottling. And so it's like, okay, so we're doing all that at the same time, and so that was kind of the goal, was empty tanks, bottle. So then, and there was many times where we were filling the tanks as soon as they would empty. Pause. I guess there was construction going on to the tanks for a period of time in order to kind of modernize the tanks because they didn't really have proper cooling. Tanks nowadays, they are cylindrical. They call it a dimple jacket, like a second, like a blanket on the outside of it, and it runs the refrigerant through there. And these tanks that were built in the 80s were basically tanks, and you could see they had like troughs around the outside of them, and they would just basically hose them down with water, and that was their cooling system. And they were large tanks too, especially by Oregon standards. We're probably putting 25, 30 tons in the tanks, so to cool them that way was kind of crazy to begin with. And then we had, at some point in time, somebody put some cooling on them, and it was like basically take a pipe and cut it down the middle, so you have like a half a pipe, and they wrapped it around, and it was just like a few times. It was, I guess, better than the other, but not really great either. And so a couple of, like 3 times around once and 3 times around another spot. And then my friend, being the kind of operations person, he was having them put the modern kind of dimple jackets on. So we'd empty a tank, they would put that stuff on there, which would take a week or 2 sometimes, and then they're finished, okay, we'll fill it up, And so that was a big part of the winemaking in India, which obviously creates a lot of pressure on bottling and the quality, and you're just like making compromises, and it's a tough situation to be in. So it was definitely trial by fire, and that was a lot of fun about it too. And it's just incredibly stressful, but it definitely taught me a lot of things that I use today, and just how to manage it all. But going back to the bottling line, I remember the cases are being produced and filling the boxes, and in the U.S. we put those on a pallet and we palletize them and forklift them to the other part of the warehouse, and in India they just pick up the box and somebody carries it to the warehouse, and so next guy comes, next case, so like on the first tour I actually saw this where there was like 30 people just like in a line carrying boxes or walking back to the bottling line, like going to the warehouse. So it's like this continuous circle, and you're just like, okay, that's one way that they work. And an example would be, I said, do we have a forklift here at the winery? And he's like, oh yeah, we bought one like a year and a half ago, but nobody ever uses it. And so there's this brand new forklift sitting there, and they just nobody had like conceptualized that because it was such a foreign idea, and so one of the main goals there was like, okay, and again, similar kind of aspect. When we ferment the red grapes, we got to dig out all the pomace, and 25, 30 ton tanks. It's a lot of grape skins, and the first time I saw them do that, again, I was observing their work, and they were just shoveling into little crates, and then they would like slide the crates on the ground to the next guy and kind of daisy chain them out to the press, and they were manually loading, no hoppers. I mean, modern equipment too, it's not like we had, it was like Italian presses and all that, but it took them like a day and a half to empty the tank, and so it was like, okay, we need to like figure this process out to make it a little better, and that was the forklift thing. And so it's one of the goals in that time period was making that work anyway. And I don't think that I had to move tanks and just kind of change a lot of the system and make things work in order to dig into a tote to then take it to the press with the forklift, and get that process done quicker. And it was a long effort, and I think as soon as I left, they went back to the old way of doing it probably. So that's just how it was there. So again, me trying to change things, I guess. But
was there much industry around? Were there other wineries? Was it a growing thing there?
So we were in Bangalore in the south, and I think that's because where the operations and the headquarters of the other business was. The owner lived in Mumbai, and so it's kind of funny because there, when you produce wine in a state and you want to send it to another state, it's almost like exporting to another country. There's like, I think 13 national languages, and so every state kind of has its own rules. So it's similar to exporting to another country where you have to put different labels on there. They have different taxation laws and requirements, so we would a lot of times bottle the wine without labels, and then, okay, it's shipping to here, so we'll put them on before we ship them. The big part of the industry there at the time was around Mumbai, because that was where the consumption was, the primary part of it. So there was, because the consumption there, the industry was there, and then you didn't face this taxation issue because they're taxing each other as well, the states from one to another. So we actually had a satellite winery just on the other side of the border in Maharashtra, which is the state of Mumbai. Excuse me. And so we were managing another winery there, but that was kind of on the outskirts. I never actually went to the industry, the center of the industry in India and experienced that. So I didn't meet a lot of colleagues in the Indian wine industry, but I did meet a lot of travelers and foreigners that were interested in the industry itself, and actually winemakers from other parts of the world as well that would come, and it's kind of opens your eyes. You realize that they're making wine everywhere. I met a guy from like Azerbaijan making wine there, and he had crazy stories. I was like, your stories are crazier than mine, and I can't believe it. But it was just an interesting insight into what's going on. And most of those guys are French most of those people are French that are making wine all over in those funky spots in the world. So Chinese winemaking as well. So. And then we actually had a technician come once, and he was Italian because I had to fix a piece of equipment, and they weren't able to do it. Brought this guy from Italy, and he was just he couldn't speak that good of English, but I showed him. It was like, it's India. There's like just trash everywhere and just craziness, and I kind of like just pointed to the place and was like, look at this, and he's like, oh, this is a clean winery, He's like, by Indian standards, He's like, yeah, you should see the rest of them. And I was like, okay, and yeah, and he'd been to all over parts of the world. He's like, oh, your workers here are paid very well compared to this region where I actually was servicing stuff as well. So. Yeah,
that's crazy.
After about 6 months of that, King Estate gave me a call. They had an opportunity. At that point in time, I think they were looking at setting up shop in Walla Walla. got that call, and I was like, okay, this is great, because I actually told the Indian company I gave them 2 years commitment, but I bailed on that. After 6 months, I was like, this is just too much. It's too far away. I mean, you're on the other side of the planet, and you feel so far away from your family, and and so that was hard, and the job itself was difficult enough, and so decided to do the easier thing and make wine in the U.S. at that point in time. So
So what was that position at King Estate?
I think it was just enologist at that point in time. I believe that was the title I was given. At that point in time, I was actually working in Walla Walla. So they had this Walla Walla project going on. It was a second brand that they had. It's called North by Northwest, and they needed somebody. They were making wine at a custom crush facility. It was actually an alternating proprietorship is what they actually call it technically, but it was just a shared space that they were trying to set up the brand in order to get labeling to be authentically in Walla Walla, and then they were at the time looking to actually set up winemaking facilities up there. That was probably the 3 to 5 year plan at the time. So kind of joined the team based in Eugene, and then I spent the harvest there in like a kind of a guest house and just sampling the grapes, going to all the vineyards around that we had contracted fruit with, just monitoring things, helping make the harvest decisions, processing, directing winemaking at that point in time. It was a shared facility, but you couldn't just walk up and use the pumps or whatever. It was kind of like you just sit to the side and tell us what to do. It was that kind of a place. So there's places like that around here as well. But so hard to be actively involved in the physical part of winemaking. So tasting, smelling, making sure things are good, making sure that kind of the process is happening as we wanted to. And that was a difficult year there as well. And 2008 was a cooler year in Oregon, and it was cooler up there as well, but we had a big frost event that happened, and that was kind of the part of the season. It was pretty late, but I remember just how bad it was. It got maybe 25 degrees or something like that, to where the canopy or all the leaves essentially just were turning brown like immediately, and so that was one of the big challenges of getting the last fruit off. Again, it was late. We had probably harvested 75% of our crop at the time, but kind of late cab sites were still out there, and so and it was interesting. It's over the course of a few days. You can imagine everybody's calling to harvest the stuff at the same time. Everybody wants to. So there's only so much labor to go around to get the harvest done. So. That was, seeing some of our blocks after 3 or 4 days, the berries start to kind of shrivel, and then you've had the challenge of getting in there and harvesting to where the leaves are brown but still in the canopy or still on the vine. So you're in there and the stuff's crumbling onto the grapes, and it was just it was challenging as well. So.
Well, I'm curious, after a year like that in 2008, with all of those different kinds of challenges, did you ever doubt that that's where you wanted to be? Did you want to stay in the industry?
I think at that point in time, just the variation, and it was like, it was a great career. I mean, you get, again, to apply lots of different types of knowledge, and kind of everybody comes from a different background, I think, in this industry, and so you can kind of apply what you had previous experience into it, and so I saw a place for that anyway, and I'm not sure everybody has that vision, but I saw what I could do anyway for the industry as well, and just and again, it's not like a 9-to-5 job where you're sitting at a desk all day and just kind of, doing spreadsheets, although more and more of it is becoming that way, at a certain point when you get to a certain part of your career development, and it does kind of become more of that.
So at that point then, after that, I guess we talked about kind of the challenging 2008, what was next for you? What were you kind of looking for at that point?
So, I mean, framing it, going back to 2008, where I remember kind of everybody sitting there, the stock market's crashing, and just like, At the time, Tony Reinders, who was Domaine Serene guy, I think he had just left Domaine Serene. He was actually making wine at the same place I was, called Artifacts. There's kind of a lot of upstart wineries, I would say, there. That I think their idea with that custom crush facility was to kind of, build up wineries to the point where they could then go off and start their own brands or whatever. But so he was making wine there. I just remember him just like kind of putting into perspective about the stock market, and the crash, and it's like, and connecting it to wine, and just talking about the how that's going to affect our industry. So at the time, you had the housing market crash and kind of that happening in the bigger picture of things, and so definitely wanted to stay in the industry and be with a stable company at that point in time is kind of how you have to think of it, having that realization anyway. And so I had a good job. And I figured I would just kind of stick it out with King Estate. It was a good company, family owned. It was a great team that we worked with there. And stable, they were a strong Oregon brand. I think at the time, it kind of made the recommendation to them that, hey, maybe this isn't the best situation for us at this Artifacts, given the conditions of the market and the expense of making wine there. I think they saw, okay, this may be not the best time to try to launch a new brand in a new region, although probably was the best time, really, and if you kind of look at things, it's invest when things are on a downturn, really. But we kind of pulled out of that, and so all those wines eventually came back home, and we finished them in Eugene at that point in time, or in, I guess, 2009 is probably when those wines, we ended up shipping them back home, and they just kind of set up headquarters there and worked for a number of years for the King family down there. So until 2015, I left King Estate to come join here at Stoller.
So before we get to that, tell me about, obviously you mentioned kind of getting your India experience, kind of getting dropped in the deep end, kind of bypassing all of the steps after internship to being a winemaker. Tell me about being back at King Estate. How did your skills develop, and how did your role develop?
Yeah. I've always been kind of a problem solver, I guess, if you will. So that's a big part of winemaking, I think, is solving problems and managing chaos in a bit of a way. And so India definitely was a trial by fire experience there, and you just kind of thrown in there, and you have to come up with creative solutions, and so coming back, I was like, well, this is all going to be very easy, compared to that, it's I have chilling here, we have a process. I mean, everything was kind of developed there, and so it was a good place to have that taught to me, I guess, if you will, and to see the winemaking process through, so while I was bottling and harvesting simultaneously in India, it wasn't my wine that I was bottling, and so you really do need that full, 12 or 18 month, whatever the wine program cycle is. You need to put stuff from the beginning and put it to bed at some point in your career and kind of follow it all the way through. So it was a really good place to do that with them as well. So the skills I brought to them was just kind of, I was like managing, I was part of the tasting team, so getting experience there, and just kind of handling projects and side things, I would say, that winemakers didn't necessarily want to deal with. Just a lot of different things, I guess. One of the projects the winemaker, one of them put me on at the time was, he was new with the company, and he said, okay, I need to know, I'm trying to make this Pinot Gris that these other people made before, and he was like, do all the research, you're good at computers, and tell me the whole history of the previous wines that were made here, so I kind of dug up all the historical records and then kind of gave him the milestones or the things that were critical to probably what the process was to make their house style of wine. So that's kind of an example of things. Getting exposure to like lab testing results and seeing those things, being part of that group, and just interpreting the data and deciding what to do. Some changes there in 2008 into early 2009. I think they laid some people off, so some winemakers were laid off, I believe, at the time, and so responsibilities were given to me at that point in time as well. So kind of, again, I think people just recognize that I could, give this person work to do, and he'll figure it out, basically. And so, given a lot of responsibilities, I guess, rapidly, but not anything over my head. At that point in time, I was working for this guy. He was the kind of, I would say, one of the formidable mentors I had. His name was Jeff Kandarian, and he was a pretty wild guy, very emotional, but super smart, and just, I could see in him, he had the business perspective of things, and it's really a lot of what he taught me was not only how to make good wine, get it done, but how to do it in a way that makes sense, or at least be cognizant of, this is a business that we're all in. We have to do things and try to meet a price point and do things in a realistic manner that the business can survive, and so that wasn't his main objective to teach me that, but that was what I learned a lot from him was, just getting introduced to all that, I think at that point in time in 2009, getting those responsibilities, and then just kind of working with him more and more as well.
You mentioned this was your first time kind of seeing the process, the 12 to 18 month process. What did you think of it as you kind of saw the outside the harvest box for the first time, and what did you kind of see as potential for you down the line in the winemaking process?
You could see, I think when you follow the full cycle there, you're realizing that it's, the winemaking side of it and the harvest side is very romantic, but then kind of that ends, and so just kind of, there's stuff in tanks, what are we doing with it, and just following that process of shaping the wines, it's a common expression is that, the wines have baby fat right when they're born, and you kind of have to let that melt off and, really see them develop, and so that was a big part of what you learn, I think, in that period of time is, okay, I think of like some varietals, it's like Pinot, you can taste it for the first couple of months and it just kind of does this big sine wave, and then as you start to hit, I feel like March and April, the differences in them, because you can taste it one day and it's one thing, and another day it's like, wow, this is incredibly different, and so you get less surprises like that in April and March, and so that's when things kind of, you hone in and you start really seeing the identity of the wine, that I feel like anyway, and become more consistent anyway, and so just following that process is super valuable. And then kind of everything else is happening. You're kind of putting things together in the timeline of the wine itself. Okay, we got to get these wines ready for market quickly. These are long-term wines. They're in barrel for 18 months, and seeing the kind of how all those designs come into play, and then how all that works within everything you have in the winery, and so of course the final moment, I think, is bottling the wine, and so you only have so much capacity on the packaging side of it, so you have to kind of think about how to stagger all those out, and that is also probably a historical reason why wines are made in certain ways as well. So just getting exposure and seeing that whole part of the process and putting that puzzle together, and so whether I could do anything better at that point in time or not, from 2009 to 2012, I would say, it was just more about taking it in and again solving problems as they arrived, and helping the winemaker do their job at that point in time. It was a fairly good sized facility there. I think we were probably making over 120,000, 150,000 cases probably at that point in time in that building. Simultaneously, we launched a brand in 2008, or they did, and it was called Acrobat. And it was like again, because of the economic conditions, we came out with another version of our Pinot Gris and our Pinot Noir, a lower price point wine. So again, working with Jeff, and that he had experience. He came from Del Rio, but before that he was in the California wine industry, and he worked in like kind of bulk facilities, let's say, or bigger processing places. So he kind of knew some of the tricks about, how to make larger volumes of wine in different methods, and so we were, putting a spin on Pinot Noir, I guess, and, how to make the wines. I don't want to go too far into the details, I guess, but because they're secret stuff. But anyway, so he taught me a lot of that part of winemaking, as well as he was also, really a high-end winemaker as well. I'm kind of rambling. I guess I forgot my train where I was going with this one, but.
Just sort of talking about the kind of the trajectory between 2009 2015 for your skill set, and I'm also curious about, as you're working with him specifically and working on all these wines, were you developing kind of your own sort of winemaking style or preferred winemaking method? Yeah,
certainly. I would say, just to address that, I think it became obvious to me that, of course everybody says, great wines are made in the vineyard. And it became more and more evident, starting to get exposure to visiting the places, seeing how the vines are managed. It was my style. I think what I would say is that I try to let the vineyard be expressed anyway, and so don't fight that, if you will. And you can do a lot of things with winemaking and try to extract things and heavy amounts of oak, all that. But my style personally is to kind of let the vineyard sing through if we can. So, and there's just a lot of exposure. I would say what I got from King Estate was seeing so many different Pinot Noir vineyards, so many different Pinot Gris vineyards, different appellations. We were buying from probably every sub-appellation that you could buy, and so really kind of having a nice view of the entire state there. So finding out which regions I liked, that kind of a thing. So I would say over time your style, I don't know if I necessarily like Jeff made wines a certain way and I would make wines a certain way. I learned a lot from him, but I also kind of developed my own thoughts. There was I tasted a wine recently that was made by a protege of a very high-end winemaker, and it was like, they were just trying to make the same wine and it was a very unique style, but you could tell the protege just was like, okay, I'm just redoing what this person did, and so a lot of people, I guess, maybe do that and learn directly, whereas, to me, I just feel like, again, I think like Jeff would make wine a certain way, and my experience is kind of doing your own thinking as well, and just learning. I mean, there's only so many of these opportunities that you get to make wine in a year, and the one cycle, it's incredibly long. So it's frustrating in that way that you can't necessarily gauge the impact that you have on the wines, and there's only so many of those opportunities. And so I feel like that's where like family history and some of the older world winemaking families have a real advantage on us, to where you grew up with that family, with that wine, and your grandparents before you kind of figured it out, or their trials have come, and especially given a certain specific property, if they're working with that one place, and And then I think they become stubborn in a lot of ways too, is what I've been told about the French winemaking side. Barrel reps have talked to us and they're like, yeah, I can't, no matter what I do, I can't sell a new barrel to this winery because that's the program. It's so conservative. But they said if those winemakers will consult on projects here in California and Europe, and I'll try those barrels, all day long. And they'll try new stuff when they're over here, but you don't touch the kind of the sacred family side there. So that's, I guess, one of the great things about being in this part of the world is that we are so in the infancy of making wines here, and I think Oregon's really figuring it out in the past, 10, 20 years for sure. I think you have this kind of rapid advancement that's happened in many, many ways, from the research that's happened, the collaborative nature of the industry, and just the amount of people making wines. Obviously, their trials kind of all come in, and there's a lot of improvement, I think, in the qualities of wines. Not that I can't go back to the 70s and 80s and talk about those wines. I don't go back that far, but I would think that a lot of the founders would say that probably the average wine in Oregon is of higher quality, I would say. So, yeah.
So, what brought you to Stoller?
Yeah, that was an interesting story as well. Obviously, come work for King Estate, had sourced vineyards all around the state, and would commonly be up in this area, looking at vineyards, sampling grapes, just kind of doing that work. And I always drive by, and you see this huge hillside of a lot of vineyard. And I remember, because I had visited the winery, I don't know when it was, but it was like fairly small production at that point in time. There was this tasting room here. Melissa was making the wines. I remember she gave us a little tour, and it's this kind of tiny little place, and I'm like, this, and I always saw this vineyard. It's definitely way bigger than the winery. So I had kind of always asked myself the question of, like, why don't they just at least produce all their own grapes and their own wine, and then there's the kind of the part of the industry where you can sell wines to one another. It would make more financial sense that way, most likely. But so I always kind of had that thought of, like, why aren't they doing that? And it even crossed my mind a couple of times. I think I even approached Melissa about it. I was like, hey, at the time, I think at King Estate, we were looking at building a facility. I was like, hey, we can, let's just bring all your fruit in there and we'll turn it into wine, and we can, create a business out of that, basically. And I think I approached her about that in like 2012 or 13 or something. She's like, yeah, whatever, that's probably not going to happen, essentially. And then I just, I really wasn't actively looking for work at the time. I was vice president of operations at King Estate at the time there. It kind of was more managing winemakers and kind of the entire process of winemaking. But I saw a job posting just kind of randomly, and I said, oh, that was interesting. And I sent them an email, and she responded to me and was like, hey, we're very interested in you, let's have a conversation. So I said, okay, let's take it to the next level, I guess, and I'll figure out what. So I came up and I met with her and Gary, I believe Gary Mortensen, and we. They basically explained they were going to do essentially exactly what I had thought they should be doing the whole time, was building another facility, kind of expanding the wine program. I think a lot of this was, I'm not sure if driven by Bill Stoller's vision, or I know Gary's he has a lot of vision as well. So they had built this tasting room since the last time I had visited, so that was creating a lot of pull on the product itself. And they just wanted to kind of build a kind of a less high-end winemaking facility. The winery over here, we call it the Reserve Winery, is 5 tons, 3 tons. It's made for really high-quality winemaking that is, very much lot-driven, block-specific, and then they were going to build a winery that was more like, okay, we're going to make great wines, and I still believe the fact that you can take, 3 great blocks, put them together, and make a just as good of a wine. So, they were looking at more 12-ton fermenters at this new facility in order just to kind of scale things up to have the capacity for the winery to handle the full vineyard. And so when I joined the company, they were just kind of breaking ground on the new winery, and they wanted somebody to kind of be a little bit of a liaison between the construction crew, ordering equipment, just kind of bringing all the pieces together and getting the winery off to a running start in 2015. So there was a lot of challenges of that. That was kind of the first experience I had with that, and kind of project management in that way, and learned a lot there for sure. But getting everything to happen before harvest is pretty challenging. So and it's always that way. It's like start construction as early as you can in the spring, and then it's like everything's just kind of flying in at the last minute, and you're kind of putting everything together and then starting to make wine as well. So luckily we weren't making a vast amounts of wine that first year, but it was enough of a challenge to complete it. But we had a pretty fun little team there. I had a guy, Marcus was his name. Do you remember Marcus? Yeah, Marcus was kind of the right hand man at that point in time, and it was the two of us plus a few Italian interns, and we had a fun time kind of making it happen. So joined with them in 2015, did that, and then it's kind of been ramping up growth and scaling up ever since then. So we're just kind of producing more and more wines, and the company's growing at a pretty rapid pace. And of course, there's all kinds of challenges that come with that and with scaling the wines and the winemaking and the brands and all that stuff. So
we'll talk a little bit about those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, every year it's kind of a new thing, it seems. So let me think of where to start here. Scaling the winemaking off the estate was fairly manageable. That wasn't that challenging. I think we always had enough space designed into the winery here to be able to take and as well, when you look at one site like this, things tend to come in at once, so you kind of have to have that capacity for influx. Gary kind of being the visionary, I guess, if you would, he said at some point in time we need a second brand or a lower price point kind of entry level program. So we launched chemistry in, I think 2017 was our first vintage. You sure about that? I'm pretty sure there's a 17 Pinot Noir. I think Michelle's wrong about that actually. But anyway, we made started this chemistry brand, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris at the time. That enabled us to gather wines from around the different regions and different parts of the valley and kind of do what others were and kind of exploring and purchasing grapes and bringing stuff in from off-site. So that has been kind of its whole other thing. We have a viticulturist who primarily does the sourcing and whatnot. And so just putting all those teams together, who's doing what, and everything's new. There's always kind of figuring that out, and that is the challenge. I think is the management of the personalities and the way you're communicating with one another. As the company grows and gets bigger, it's always that. I feel like I feel like making wine is the easy part, and selling wine and managing everything around it is far more challenging, I think. So, yeah.
What about the other brands that have come under the umbrella?
Well, so we started canning wine as well. That was a whole new experience kind of thrown in there. It was kind of a race to get to the market as quickly as we could because we knew there was going to be an influx of other brands coming, so we could kind of position our product on the shelf in advance of that. We felt that was an advantage for us. That was there's a whole host of challenges there, and getting the materials to do it, learning crash course about what do we need to do differently with wines in a can. It's a dramatically different package than there are elements of that you have to consider as a winemaker. Quality perspectives as well. Finding the wine to do it was a challenge in itself. And then kind of just learning things as you go too. And unfortunately, it's like sometimes you make the mistakes that enable you to learn these things. But we just realized how kind of sensitive the product was to punctures and all about leaking cans and how they destroy other wines. And so there was like that part was no fun. And putting together. We got cans, they're loose, what do we put them in a tray or 12-pack? I mean, I don't think the industry has necessarily figured out what the right solution for even the wine in a can. There's so many different formats and versions of it, so I think we're all still trying to figure that out. I think there's a place for cans for sure, and somebody sent me a picture the other day of a Oakville cab, in a can. It was $85 for a 250 ml maybe, and I was like, I don't think your high-end Napa cab drinker's gonna go for wine in a can, and it was just kind of funny. It was like promoted as the most expensive wine in a can, basically, is how they were selling it. It's just like sometimes the wine fits the situation, or the circumstance or the place you are in your life. And, so I really think that there's great opportunity for that kind of alternative packaging that creates more of a way for your kind of average consumer to consume wine, and it's just there. You don't have to be at a restaurant or a dinner table, or in the backyard with your friends or whatever it is. You can be out and doing things in other locations, and so camping or whatever the heck it is. So that's been a fun experience as well. So cans, chemistry, Stoller. At some point, Bill Stoller acquired Chehalem Winery. The rest of it, I guess, that he didn't own. So bringing that brand in and kind of working through that, because there's a lot of history with that brand as well. And so, okay, how do you maintain that? How do you optimize, resources that we might have that they don't have, there's a lot of effort put into that brand and kind of rebranding it. Giving it a new package, a little bit of a new identity while trying to kind of maintain that historical, because it's an older brand. There's a lot of history behind it as well. So getting that experience as well was great.
And what was your role as all these things were happening?
Either like winemaker or director of winemaking at the time, one of those titles. So. Kind of not a lot of direct connection with Chehalem at that point in time, but are you talking specifically Chehalem?
Just kind of all of just
them? Just again, problem solver, put things together. We want to make wine in a can. Well, Ben's the guy who's going to make that happen, So it's like a large part of it's like that, with of course with help from everybody around, but just picking up the phone, calling the right people, making sure we have this or that, and have always kind of created I see the process from the beginning to the end, and kind of what milestones, what we need at certain points of time, and trying to make sure it can all happen without a lot of pain, hopefully. So that was, that's my main role. And of course, like always being involved in the winemaking at this point in time, I'm less that. I'm vice president of operations here now, so I tried to let the winemakers make the wine, and like Melissa and I, she's the VP of winemaking, we'll both kind of participate in a lot of final blend tastings, just make sure the style is there, make sure the teams have the resources they need to make high quality wines at this point in time. We're developing, we've expanded the winery that we built in 2015. Have added a lot of capacity, so we do some custom crush for clients in order to kind of fill the winery up for the time period that we don't need all that space, and so that's kind of a business unit on its own. We built a warehouse with a pretty modern bottling line. So we're doing all of our own bottling now. It's kind of something I probably brought to the table. Well, for sure I did. We're working at King Estate. We had our own bottling line, and it came to Stoller, and it's like we just bring a mobile truck in, and as we scaled up more and more the volumes, it's just more difficult, to me to have a truck come in and have to we got to get 10 wines ready at the same time, and it's very nice and luxurious, I think, to have your own line, to be able to do it on the timeline that you want to. If a vendor doesn't show up with their materials, you can say, okay, I'm going to put that off for a week or two and we'll come back. Whereas if you're scheduling a mobile truck, it's very hard to get them to come back because they're pretty tightly booked, especially at the end of the year when everybody's trying to get their wines out of barrels and out of tank. And so there's kind of a lot of exposure and risk there. So I talked Bill Stoller and probably twisted Melissa's arm into getting a bottling line. So we were able to, and as we scale up, I saw that as an inevitable thing that we needed. So we have developed that team. We do custom bottling for some other wineries as well because we have extra capacity there. So kind of recruiting business, I guess, to come in and do some of that. Trying to find the proper partners to do it as well. So we don't have a lot of customers. We have customers that we consider good customers that are making their wine portfolios fairly simple. Mm-hmm. So we're making higher volumes of a single SKU, and so that's ideal from our perspective anyway, not having to focus on so many different things. And I think that's where the scale of that facility kind of comes. Mm-hmm. It's advantageous to them as much as us, and we've had them mention that the quality of their wines is better now that they kind of brought everything to our facility because there's just more focus on it, where they may have had different facilities and they were kind of bringing wines in from all over. Just kind of everything's there with a lot of focus. So I think our team does a great job on that as well. But yeah, kind of brings me to today, I guess.
So as a VP of operations, your role is to kind of oversee all of it then.
Yeah.
How do you sort of manage where you spend your time and how you kind of focus?
Yeah, I mean there is a lot of all of it. It's kind of connecting the dots between the vineyard teams and the winemaking teams, sometimes kind of settling arguments and that kind of thing. It's a challenge to figure out where to put the hours of the day into sometimes, but I think it's apparent to me what needs the most attention. I feel like sometimes others might think that other things need other attention, and depending on who that person is, I'll either do it or not, So if they're above me on the ranking, then for sure they're getting what they want, But if I feel like that's my skill, is I just kind of have a natural ability to know what needs to be addressed when. If I could put it together in a more organized fashion, sometimes I wish that would happen, but we're just kind of a wild company in that way, that we're faced with just normal challenges of just being a business that's growing, creating new brands and all that. But I mean, we just have the challenges of nature that have given us the past couple of years. So that's not been a huge amount of fun either. And so that's just kind of those curveballs that just get thrown at us, and we have to figure out solutions one way or another. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that as long as we're here. Let's talk about the last couple of years. Tell me about 2020 to start with, and the ample challenges it brought, and what you kind of had to do to get through and to get by. Yeah.
So 2019 was great. I think it was a classic Oregon vintage. You're coming off of that. And again, like I started in 07 in Oregon. So 07, 8 was pretty good. I was in Washington. 9 was kind of its own thing. We had a kind of a heavy year there, I would say. So what I remember about 2009 is that fermenters filled very quickly, and then it was like, we got to turn the tanks, ferment, and get out so we can get the next stuff in. So that was this challenge. It was very hot, big clusters. I didn't really like the wines from 09 that much. 10 and 11 were challenging, cool years, wet. You had botrytis pressure, so 12 was good, super light. 13 was the big rain event, 6 inches of rain in 3 days. And so that was, just a few vintages there that were memorable and challenging, and then you start getting into post 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Those were all just like cakewalks, and so it's like, man, this is Oregon's great now, these vintages are wonderful, there's like no, and being up here, especially at King of State, we had a really late site, and so you'd always have some kind of late season pressure and challenges there, and being a cool site and high elevation, whereas Stoller is like one of the earliest sites in the state, so it's like, yeah, it's fantastic. Coming from one of the latest ones to one of the earliest ones is quite a transition. So seemed very easy there for a while, And in the back of my mind, it was like, well, this isn't going to last forever. We're going to have a couple of these happen here upcoming. But then 2020 was obviously its own crazy challenge with the wildfires and the smoke. So that was. Yeah, I've got to take a deep breath to kind of get over this one again. But, we did a really good job, I feel like, here at Stoller in handling that. I remember the fire being, we came in, I don't remember which morning it was, like the 12th or something like that of September. Anyway, there was the first fires that came in, and I think it was at Chehalem Mountain, and it was like thick smoke. 8 o'clock in the morning, you could hardly see. The sky was just red. I mean, it was crazy, and it's like, the fire's right there. It was a eerie feeling for sure, and that kind of developed into eventually the kind of the ceiling lifted, and actually light came out, and you had this kind of high smoke, but it really wasn't among us, and so. Just kind of wondering, at that point in time, what are we going to do? You just don't know at that point in time. I think the winds were blowing from the west to the east at that point in time, so there was active fires happening in the Cascades, and those winds. Well, actually, I'm sorry. It was the big windstorm knocked a bunch of power lines down. That was kind of how everything got started, and it was blowing in that direction, and that's what started those fires, so we didn't get this influx of smoke at ground level, so we're kind of sitting there wondering what's going to happen, and then I believe it came in at ground level at some point in time, and I remember I talked to one of our clients here. He was like, hey, we're going to bring everything in we can, and he came from California, so he had a lot of experience working with wine and wildfire smoke, and so I just remember him saying, oh yeah, we're bringing anything that's even close to ready, we're bringing it in, so it was like, that put up red flags for me, and so I was like, okay, that's something to note, and I called up a friend who is down in California. It's actually Jeff, the guy I used to make wine with, and I said, hey, do you have a good winemaking protocol for like smoked wines? And he said, yeah, don't pick the grapes, And I was like, okay. So alarming again, and he's like, if you got anything, if you have to bring them in, do it, otherwise it's like the challenge there is you're bringing in wines that are going to need so much work, and they're, you're going to be fighting it the whole time, Of course, we're going to bring in everything that we have, and at that point in time, we were close enough to maturity here that probably in like a cold year, we would have been like, okay, let's bring it in, and we just kind of took that strategy to say, okay, anything that's even close here, like that's when I kind of started having conversations with Jason, Melissa. It was like, hey, maybe we should like think about just like it doesn't seem like it's going away. It's going to get worse. That's everything I've heard about it. So we should just start harvesting. So we kind of put the team together, and kind of anything that was dedicated towards our lower price point program that would go to the other facility and not this one. We just started, luckily we had a mechanical harvester that the owner had purchased, so we were able to put people in like a filtered cabin, so we could have a harvest team out there, whereas like you kind of struggled, I think, if you were hand picking with the ethics of sending somebody out there into like, it was thick smoke. I mean, you couldn't see the vineyard, so there was that kind of, that you're thinking about that the whole time. And so we were able to kind of keep a smaller crew going in protected conditions, and we harvested everything we could as fast as we could over the course of 3 days probably. So we were actively still picking. We brought everything in that was kind of that level of maturity, put it away, started fermenting it, and then just kind of we're making the wines in the cellar and on pause, harvesting while the smoke was still there. And so it took a couple of weeks for it to really clear. And that was like an interesting experience as well, because what's happening to the grapes this whole time? Are they they're not getting sunlight? Are they maturing? You're kind of wondering about the physiology of the grape. What's happening to the acidity? And so we were checking bricks and we were seeing like nothing's moving. And so it's a really just a weird experience to go through, to kind of have these grapes that are so close to maturity and you're not seeing them advance anymore because they're just not getting photosynthesis. And then when the smoke cleared, it was like they were just, ready to chug through. They somehow knew, that they were mature but not producing or not moving along. And then so it seemed like as soon as the smoke cleared, it was like they put on, they just accumulated a ton of sugar very quickly, and so that was kind of its own thing too. But just having to learn about the micro fermentation protocols and making small batches of wine in order to evaluate, how affected those grapes could be. That was like an annoying process, but something you just had to do. There's no other way. There's not a lot of tests that you could run at the time, and if you could, they were backed up. So there's really not a lot of ways to evaluate it. So you were just kind of going old school with micro fermentations and trying to extract whatever it is, so you could just get the tiniest taste of a vineyard, to evaluate it to see how impacted it's going to be, and working with different growers, because at a certain point it's we had to decide what to pick and what not. I mean, some of the fruit, there was a couple of blocks there that were so far beyond what could make like something recognizable as a wine. So we had a couple of those tough conversations, and we had made the wines, and we said, you need to taste them with us, and you could see in their face that they knew also, and it's like there's really nothing that we can do. There's very few tools we have in the toolbox to turn this into the wine that it could have been at one point in time. So those were really difficult conversations to have, and place to be, to where you're telling somebody like that as a grower who's putting their livelihood out there. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, there is no point, And I even had a grower that, it was kind of funny. He didn't want us to sign a contract before harvest because there's this kind of dance that can happen. It's like, hey, we want to secure the fruit, but he at the time he was not interested in it because he thought he could drive the price up by staying away from a contract, and then the smoke came and it was like, oh, good thing we don't have that contract, It's kind of what we were thinking to one another. Me and Jason had that conversation, and he was, I remember him, he wasn't expecting us at that point in time. He kind of knew the game. He knew the risk he had, and I remember he's a guy I've worked with for a long time, and he called and asked if we could turn the wine. How much would it cost me to have you guys make the wine and produce it? And I said, hey Chris, I just don't think, I think you shouldn't even do that. I think you should just stay away from, you should file whatever you can or cut your losses where you're at, because this was over in the Silverton side of the valley, and it was very bad over there. I remember going, and it was like going to another planet. You saw ash all over the place, and it was just, it was bad here, but you go over there and it's just like pouring out of the mountains there, and I just was like, I just don't think you should do anything. Don't put the money into that, don't throw more money after bad, and I didn't know what it ended up with that. I think I talked to him last year. I met him at harvest, and And he was like, oh, they turned it into something, is what he was saying. But Jason told me he had a conversation with me. He's like, I should have just listened to you guys, and not done that, because he came out even farther behind at the end of it, So I think we were valid in many ways, but that's just a really hard place to be. So. But the wines that we produced off the vineyard here, we did all the analysis on them, and we could see that we had those 3 days that we were picking. You could see this at the end. The smoke compounds kind of went up and up and up, but they were below a level to where we actually packaged a very nice set of 2020 Pinot Noirs, and I think we're very proud of that. We just got some really great scores out of it, so we think we did the right thing, and we handled the situation very well. I've got a lot of compliments from people that has come through the tasting room even and say, oh yeah, we've tasted a lot of smoky wines in the valley, and and our tasting room people say, people come and they're like, wow, these wines are, they don't taste like the rest of the 2020s, so I think that kind of quick decision making that we went to get that stuff off the vine was critical, and having the ability to do it completely. So the whites that we made were good. We just kind of knew what we were doing. I think we learned very quickly, and we all adapted very quickly, and didn't try to hide from it. I think that was the biggest thing. A lot of people just ignored it or thought it would go away. Smoke cleared, let's start making wine again. And you might have picked based on characteristics, but if they accumulated sugars and everything was fine. I mean, that was the really kind of bad part about it is you could taste the fruit. It would taste wonderful, it was some of the best fruit. Like, it was set for a wonderful year, and so it was just painful because you can't necessarily taste the smoke when you taste the grapes. It only comes in wines when they're aged for a long time. So that's like, you just know it's not going to be good. And I think everybody learned that eventually. So, it was a tough year for sure. And then last year, you just had a down, of course. You got to think about 2020. A lot of wines just came off the market. The momentum of the wine industry is in Oregon as a brand in general has just been really strong, and the wine industry across the board. It's just like the pandemic. Of course, we had 2020, and the whole pandemic thing was happening too. So, like, we were wearing masks. We were wearing masks for a different reason. I was like, I couldn't believe it was like going to the crush pad, and it was hard to get people to adopt a mask at that point in time. But then when the smoke came, it was like, oh, now they're finally wearing the masks. So it was kind of funny in that way. But it's just like, it's just surreal, and that really happened. It's of all the challenges that were thrown at me in previous lives, I mean, that was definitely up there. I mean, 2013 was tough, but that was kind of a more predictable thing, I guess. We kind of know how to deal with a lot of that, whereas this was just a pandemic and wildfires, like 100-year events, basically, 200 years event overlapping on top of one another is kind of the way I see it. So, that was very challenging, and I'm very proud of the way that we handled it and the way that everybody did. So, and then 21 happened, very light yields. That was the real challenge there, where we had we want to make a lot of wine. We have a lot of wine from 2020 that didn't make it onto the shelf, and the industry is disrupted because of low yields, and so you have very great wines that came on, but just not enough. And so just managing the year supply chain, trying to keep the pipeline full to get the wine to customers has been challenging, and prices of everything are just going up. The grapes prices are going up, the bulk wine prices are going up, glass prices, and so we're in the kind of this inflationary period. And then of course we have 2022 where we're like, everybody's crossing their fingers, big harvest, we're bound to have it happen. And we had a big frost event that has kind of put a dampener on that whole thing. So it's hard to be super enthusiastic. There's our vineyard specifically got hit pretty hard, so you got to drive in, and I drive by the block that probably got hit the worst every day when I come in. And I can I have an eye for it. Most people can't necessarily see what I'm seeing, but you kind of see long shoots and short shoots, and so we're just wrestling with how to deal with that. It's definitely going to be a light year because of it. We almost have like two different crops happening is what I feel like is going to happen. So you have this stuff, the buds that never got, so in any vine you can have one bud that survived and it's on its own timeline because nothing really happened to it. Then you have the bud that maybe got killed, and then the second or third, there's another bud hiding in there that came out like a couple of weeks later, and so you have these different timelines of these grapes, and so that's like something that we have to consider and a challenge that's going to be moving forward. It's
a lot of challenges.
What's that?
It's a lot of challenges.
Yeah. This just seems not fair at a certain point in time, but this is how we survive, and this is, there's been many challenges before us, and I don't think we can necessarily complain too much, but
So what comes next here for you at Stoller?
Still crossing our fingers for this next big, huge vintage that's going to come in, but we've kind of come up with different ways to maybe deal with the shortages. So those are kind of their own. They're going to be their own challenges, I guess. Some of them are, I guess, trade secret at this point in time. So just keeping the pipeline full, I think, is the biggest challenge right now because there's so much demand for our product. And then, of course, always kind of like bringing a dose of reality to the leadership too. Some of that's part of my job too. Is like, this is the way it really is. It's not going to be better. We can all hope that it's going to be wonderful, but we have to kind of think about what sacrifices we do have to make, and what is going to give, because there's not enough to go around. So you kind of have to figure out how to deal with that kind of in the short term. I think the future of Stoller is really bright. I think we have a strong winemaking team, strong leadership team, to where we're going to continue to scale and grow. To the point where the owner doesn't want to, I guess, So that's kind of all of our MO, I believe, is to keep going and keep growing. So we want to keep up with the industry and keep up with the demand. More people are recognizing Oregon as a high-quality wine region that produces excellent wines. I think what's strong now is maybe some of the mid-value wines that are there. They're probably priced higher than most of your grocery store wines, but I think the challenge is to kind of master that part of it. So there's always going to be room and a place for very high, quality, high-touch wines, I would say, that are like, elevated in price and in quality, But I think a lot of what my challenges personally, and some of our challenges, is to create those introductory wines that can get people to know our wines in our state, and create curiosity for what else might be here. New varietals. I think. Obviously, Chardonnay is not a new varietal, but it's just it has this kind of resurgence that's going on. Always trying to figure out what can grow well here. I think that's. One of the challenges of Oregon, we've been so focused on Pinot, and we do an excellent job of that. People are seeing that Chardonnay is also excellent, and it's like there could be more and more varieties and wines that we can get people into, and create just a broader selection of wines, I feel like, from the Willamette Valley, and then there's other parts of the state that are incredibly different, So, I think sometimes those wineries, we have a big shadow, I think, that we cast on other parts of the industry where it's tough for them, because they are making excellent wines and are reasons that are not Pinot Noir, and they're very different. And so it'll be kind of fun to see. And I think that's going to happen, is that those regions are going to establish more and more of their own identity and become kind of their own things. So,
Any other kind of thoughts on the future of the Oregon wine industry?
Oh, I think it's I feel like the big wave is coming anyway. So you kind of have this. The past 10 years, you've seen a lot of investment from bigger brands from California. You have France coming in right now from the high-end side of things. And, I just think there's going to be more and more demand and more development of vineyards. I think there's kind of there's still a lot of land here. I feel like that's high-quality producing potential from even outside regions. I think about where I was in Eugene for a long time, and there's excellent Pinot Noir growing areas there that just don't have the recognition that maybe we have up here, because I think we've done a good job of promoting the industry being close to Portland, but there's just as many little fingers and sub-regions all over the state that are just going to produce more and more excellent quality wine. And like I said, I think there's going to be this kind of this people recognizing that demand for this kind of mid-priced, entry-level kind of wine from Oregon. So I feel like some of the bigger brands are probably going to come in and help develop that. So hopefully, thoughtfully anyway. So that's the scary part is, the corporations want to come in and make a bunch of money, and there is a lot of history in Oregon, and we kind of want to protect that also. I kind of see this like. It's kind of like Bordeaux and Burgundy, It's like somebody said to me, you go to Bordeaux and everybody's wearing a suit and a tie, and but you go to Burgundy and there's like families and they kind of butt heads like that. And I feel like that's kind of similar to what Oregon and maybe California have as well, that difference in perspective and style, So it'll be interesting to see how that develops anyways, because I think it's probably coming anyway. Yeah.
Anything else on the horizon for you?
I don't know. Just keep working for Bill, I guess. And my career goals are just kind of. I like what I'm doing right now. I don't want certain responsibilities. Of like anything higher than my position, which would take on different elements of the company. So I'm pretty satisfied, I think. I don't know. I've thought about, of course, like, you always think about starting your own wine brand, but again, to me, making wine is easy and selling it is the hard part, So, my wife, she's worked in DTC. We've had that discussion. She's like, I just don't want to work in DTC or run a tasting room, So it's kind of like, okay, it's kind of it, Unless we have a bunch of connections in the restaurant industry, which we don't, then that's what you have to do to sell wine. So, it'd be fun, but I don't really see that being in our cards necessarily. That's kind of it without saying too much, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover?
I went for some time, though. I'm sorry.
Never apologize. That's the whole goal. Well, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your stories with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right. Thank you.